Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason De La Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We are headed down the home stretch. Week 9 is coming up. We've got people that have clinched playoff spots. We have people that are going for playoff seeding. Things are getting crazy with some of these scores. We had upsets. We had comebacks. We had outstanding offensive performances that haven't been seen by programs for a while. That was all of Week 8, and now we're going to get into Week 9. 3 games left for most people. A couple people only have 2, and we're really getting a full look at the playoff picture. And so we'll kick things off like we always do. Jump right in, top of the heap, 5A, work our way down to 2A. We'll go over all the recap from last week. We'll talk about what the games mean this week, all the matchups. It's going to be a fun final couple weeks, the way things are shaping up, and we'll talk about all that right here on the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. And we will start, as we always do, with the Sherman Bearcats in District 6-5A, Division 1. They are 2-5 and 1-0 after losing 42-6 against Frisco Reedy. They are headed to Frisco once again and take on the Lone Star. They are 5-2, 3-2 after they won 55-14 against Lebanon Trail. And this is a huge matchup when you look at the standings, both this week and next week for the Bearcats. If they're going to have a chance to make the playoffs, they need to win this week. They need to win next week because both Lone Star and Frisco Wakeland are the 2 teams that are directly ahead of them in the standings. And if they're going to get in, they need to have a tiebreaker over those teams. If Lone Star wins this week, that will eliminate Sherman. Sherman's already lost to the top 3 teams, Reedy being one of them last week. And Lone Star is tied for 4th with Wakeland. So it's essentially the start of the playoffs for the Bearcats. Last week against Wakeland, against Reedy, they're up 6-0. They get a 61-yard touchdown pass from Caleb Orr to Phoenix Grant. Midway through the first quarter, they're up 6-0. And then that was it for the Bearcats scoring against a really good Reedy team who is undefeated on the season. We talked about last week. They're looking at finishing off a 10-0 regular season. I think they're up to number 6. They're either 6 or 7 in the ranking in the 5A Division 1 rankings this week. They do have Frisco next week. That's obviously going to be huge to decide the top 2 spots in the district standings. But they're doing what they've been doing to a lot of people. We mentioned last week that one of the wins that they had was against Denison, and that was a 41-7 game. And we saw how even Sherman Denison were in the Battle of the Axe. So the outcome is similar there. And obviously you would have liked to have a better showing if you're Sherman. But ultimately at this point in the season, a lot of it is about who you beat and not about who you lose to. And we'll talk about that with a couple other teams down the line. The most important games for Sherman are the last 3. If they win those and get to 3 and 4, they're probably still going to need some help, but that's what's going to happen. And unfortunately, people don't like to look at the realistic aspect of it. It would have been great for them to beat Frisco Reedy. Obviously, that would have been a huge win, a huge upset. Would have caught a lot of people's attention. But then, if you lose this week to Lone Star, what you do against Reedy does not matter because Reedy is so far ahead that win essentially doesn't matter. You need to have the tiebreaker over Lone Star. You need to have the tiebreaker over Wakeland. And then you're going to finish with a Liberty team that's winless. So you that's a game you have to win because to keep pace with all the other people that have beat Liberty so far as well. So it's going to be interesting. Like I said, you've got a team that is going to know what's at stake. They know they have to go and play well. We talked about last week the game against Heritage was back in the Sherman range of a close game, a low-scoring close game that they have played in district, except for when they faced the 2 best teams in this district, Reedy and Frisco. So if you're Sherman, you're looking to, can you find a way to slow down Lone Star? Can you find a way to keep it that one-score game that it has been? And unfortunately for the Bearcats in district play, they've been on the wrong end of these close games because they're having trouble scoring. They're not scoring more than a touchdown in those games. The defense is keeping them in it. Can they put something together? They went with Caleb Orr. We talked about that last week, about him getting more time in this offense, and obviously moving Phoenix Grant around. He catches, he goes out at a receiver spot, catches a long touchdown pass. Does some, he leads the team last week, 4 catches for 96 yards. He still was in the backfield. He threw 3 times. He had a carry, but he was more wide receiver this week. And Caleb Orr, 13 of 22 for 174, with an interception and the touchdown. But the biggest thing was on the ground. Sherman could not get anything going. They actually had negative yardage, 27 carries for negative 28 yards. A lot of that is sack adjusted because of Orr. But even if you take that out, everybody else on the team ran 16 times for 1 yard. And obviously that's not going to get it done. Now, again, you played one of the best teams in the state. Lone Star is no slouch. They've picked things up here lately, but you've got to find a way to win that game to stay in the mix, to make the game against Wakeland mean something, and then ultimately to make the game against Liberty mean something. And we'll know more going into that final week if they do mean something, who's got to do what, who's got to win against who, that sort of thing, to help the Bearcats. But you want to do everything in your power to make those games meaningful, and put yourself in a position where even if you do need help, it's better than not needing help, because you've already been eliminated. So and again, this is a 7:00 start, and they are at Kuykendall Stadium, the old Frisco Memorial, for those people that are going down to go watch Sherman at Lone Star. 7:00, Kuykendall Stadium, old Memorial Stadium, for those who know that, before they made the name change in the last, I think it was last year, I think it was the first year that they changed the name. So be aware of that if you're going down there to watch that game as well. Next up in District 7-5A Division 2, we have the Denison Yellow Jackets, and they are hosting Princeton. This is a continuation of a series based on the last couple of years. This is one of the holdover matchups from the realignment. Denison is 3-4 and 1-3 after they lost 54-44 against Melissa. And Princeton is 1-6 and 0-4 after they lost 49-13 against Terrell. So Denison goes down to Melissa, who is tied for first place with Lovejoy, and puts on a performance that I think a lot of people were surprised by. This was a close game throughout, and I think a lot of people looked at, Lovejoy beat up Denison pretty good to start this 3-game losing streak that they're on. They go and play a Terrell team, who had only had the 1 district win, and that game wasn't very close, and the defense wasn't playing well, hadn't stopped it. We talked about all the stuff last week. Couldn't get a turnover, couldn't force a punt. How are they going to slow down, a Melissa team that's really good as a borderline, top 10 team based on their resume? And you look up, and it's Denison leading 14-7 in the first quarter. You look up, and it's only 29-24 in the at halftime. Denison's down, and then you look up at the end of the third quarter, and Denison is ahead. And unfortunately, they were unable to hold that 44-40 lead going to the fourth quarter. Melissa scores twice in the fourth quarter, and they were able to pull out a win. But that was definitely not what a lot of people expected, and I think it also provides a little insight to what Denison might look like the last 3 weeks. You're playing a Princeton team that's in last place. You're playing a Mesquite Poteet team that only has 2 wins. Their only 2 wins are against Greenville and Princeton, the bottom 2 teams below Denison in the standings. And then you have a game sandwiched in between there, which is against Crandall, who is tied for third with Poteet and Terrell for third place. So if Denison wins out, I think they're in. It's not a lock, so you're in kind of that Sherman situation of can we make all the games count down the stretch? And I think Denison's got to win out to have a chance. I think if they lose to Crandall, they might still have a chance. But now you're at the mercy of, can somebody beat Terrell that's not supposed to? And even then, it may not be enough. So Denison's goal going in the last 3 weeks, win these last 3, get to 4-3. If you get to 4-3, I think you're going to be in. And it still may come down to a crazy tiebreaker. There could be a 3-way tie between Denison, Crandall, and Terrell. But it's pretty clear if you win the last 3, you're in. And you should probably win this week. Princeton has not won since the first week of the season when they beat Lebanon Trail 14-7. They lost to Sherman the next week. So if we want to play the comparative score game, starting there, Denison has beaten all the teams that have beaten Princeton pretty much so far this season, except for Poteet. I think that's the only one that they haven't played in terms of the common opponents. So this sets up for Denison to get back on a winning path. They put up really good offensive numbers last week. Josh Kurtbach threw for 266 yards and 3 touchdowns, ran for a touchdown as well. Did have 5 interceptions, and now some of that was some tip balls at the line of scrimmage. Unfortunately, he's a shorter quarterback of stature, and Melissa has guys that are pushing 6'4", 6'5", and they got their hands on some balls. And then also Denison was in a mode trying to play catch up with 2 scores, trying to force some things there. But for 2 weeks in a row, you've seen the Jacket offense through the air come alive. And in this one, you had some guys that hadn't done a whole lot in that regard, but got involved. Javon Cleveland caught a touchdown pass. That's the first touchdown catch of his career. Kenyon Kelly, obviously known more for his defense at safety, had a 58-yard touchdown catch and run to open the third quarter. You throw that in with Kyson Lusain's touchdown grab. He had 5 catches for 72 yards. Typical night for him, throwing the touchdown. Ty Kirkbrod had 8 catches for 94 yards. 5 different guys caught passes. Jack Allman again on the ground, 13 carries, 55 yards. Had 2 touchdown runs. So you've got an offense that is starting to put things together. They're scoring in the 30s and the mid 40s. And so I think that's a good sign. And like we said about this defense, I know, Coach Whitson said after the game, you're going to look at the number, you're going to see they gave up 54 points, but, they got an interception near the Melissa goal line by Caleb Flowers jumping a route to set up a touchdown. They got a fumble. It was on a kickoff, so it counts as special teams. But they forced a fumble, and it wasn't a muffed kick. It was during the run back. It was a forced fumble and a fumble recovery. They got a stop on 4th down. Jacoby DeHorny made a great play on 4th and short to stop a run for a loss. They forced 4 punts. It's just Melissa's really good, and they're both going to be, them and Lovejoy are both going to probably be 7-2 going into that last game of the season, and the winner's going to get first place and the loser's going to get second place, and it should be a great game. But the fact that they hung with them, that this game was only a 10-point margin, I think really bodes well. Crandall's going to be a tough game. It's at Crandall, but you've got it lined up where if you're Denison, you know what you're doing. But it's got to start this week against Princeton. You're playing a team that the last 2 years you have not allowed a point to. I'm not saying that's going to happen for the 3rd straight year, but this is a team that you have played late in the season both those years, and you've dominated them. The scores have not been close, and you need to do that again so that way that game against Crandall could be a real big swing game next week, and then you go into a Poteet game where, depending on what happens this week and next week, if you're Denison, if you get to 3-3, there's a chance that the winner of the Mesquite Poteet Denison game, which is in Denison on a Thursday night to end the season, the winner could be in and the loser could be out. So, but to make all that happen, you got to win. The games that you're supposed to win. And if you're Denison, I think you have to look at this game as we need to win this game. We're supposed to win this game. Let's get back on the winning track and do that at Munson Stadium on Friday night. So that's where Denison will be hosting Princeton. We move down to District 5-4A Division 2, and the Van Alstyne Panthers will be hosting Bridgeport. Van Alstyne comes in at 4-4 and 3-1. They won last week against Farmersville 53-10, and Bridgeport is coming off a loss to Gainesville 36-19. They are 4-3 and 1-2, and we've continued to say because they're matching Van Alstyne win for win and loss for loss. Van Alstyne and Gainesville are tied for second place behind Aubrey, who has clinched a playoff spot. And is obviously has the inside track for the number 1 seed. But you have Van Alstyne and Gainesville at 3-1, and Bridgeport and Sanger are 1-2. And so this is a huge game for Van Alstyne because if they win, they will clinch a playoff spot. They play this week, and then they play Gainesville next week, and then they have the bye. They finish with the bye in this district. So if you're Van Alstyne, your path is win this week and we clinch a playoff spot, win next week and we get at least the second seed. And maybe we hope that there's a upset with Aubrey, however unlikely that may be, and we get to share a district championship. But at worst, if you're Van Alstyne, you're talking beat Bridgeport, beat Gainesville, be 5-1, get second place. And before the season, I think if you would have said that, I think a lot of people would have said, yeah, everybody's playing for second place behind Aubrey, and Van Alstyne's got a very good chance to do that, and they have it within their grasp. And we said Farmersville also was a team that was struggling. Van Alstyne comes out, gets up 14-3 right away. They're up 27-10 at halftime, and then they blow things open in the second half, especially in the third quarter, where they got 3 touchdowns there to put this game away and get a win to be in this position the last 2 weeks of their season. Leading the way, a lot of running in this game. Van Alstyne does 59 carries for 365 yards. Almost 100 yards passing, but a majority of the work done on the ground. Jaden Mahan, 17 carries, 152 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Dakota Howard's the one who has 2 touchdown runs, 8 carries for 85 yards. He also had a touchdown catch from Weston Johnson. So he had 3 total touchdowns, but 2 of those were on the ground. Johnston also scores on the ground. And Shane McCaslin chips in a touchdown run as well. And again, if you look at what Van Alstyne's done in this district, they have taken care of business against the bottom 3 teams, Sanger, Farmersville, and Crum. Bridgeport right now is tied with Sanger for 4th place. Like I said, you win this week, you're in, and that'd be a second straight playoff appearance for the Panthers. And you've got a good roll going potentially into the playoffs if you can win this week and beat Gainesville. And like I said, that way things are looking, right now with Gainesville, again that's a team, before coming into district they were 0-4, now they're 3-1, so it's a little bit unexpected. They're obviously getting hot at the right time, and just to look at their deal. They have the bye this week, so obviously they're just going to wait and see what happens. And then, like I said, they'll play Van Alstyne in 2 weeks, or next week, excuse me, and then they finish with Crum. So that should be a win. So ultimately, if you're looking at it, if Van Alstyne wins out, they're definitely going to be the second place team, and if they lose, you need Gainesville to lose to Crum, which I don't see happening. So that's how big that game is going to be. Potentially next week. That could be the difference between the 2 seed and the 3 seed. But you got to win the game. You got to win a game in front of you. And Bridgeport's a hungry team. They're led by former Sherman head coach J.D. Martinez. That's where he went after he left Sherman a couple years ago, and this is his second season there. And they're in a fight to get what's looking like probably the last playoff spot. They'd have to win out to have a chance to force a better seed. But right now they're tied with Sanger. and they're only a game ahead of Farmersville and Crum, and so you've got to and they end with Sanger. Bridgeport ends with Sanger, so they've got plenty to play for these next couple weeks, and so they're looking at we've got to potentially win our last 3 games to have this count for sure. So going to be an interesting matchup as Van Alstyne hosts Bridgeport on Friday night in 5-4A Division II action. At this point, I will mention the one team that is on a bye this week. That is the Whitesboro Bearcats in District 4-3A Division I. They are coming off the heartbreaking, tough, however you want to describe it, loss at Brock, 39-35. We thought this was going to be a great game. We expected it to be a great game, and it literally came down to the final play, inches from the goal line. Mac Harper tries to scramble, makes a move on a guy, and dives, and it looks like he's in, but they call him down short, and this video shows this, and this picture shows that, and how close was it to a touchdown, and half the people that see it say it's a touchdown, and half the people say no, he was stopped short. Unfortunately, it came down to that for Whitesboro. So they're sitting at 6-1 overall and 3-1 in district play. Brock is 3-4 and 3-0. So they're on bye after this game. Grayson Ledbetter had 11 carries, 141 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Harper had a touchdown run. He was that close to making it 2. He was 15 of 29 passing for 229 yards with a touchdown pass and just one touchdown pass. That was 2 touchdown passes. I misread that. Can't read my own writing, folks. He had 2 touchdown passes. Jay Sanders 3 catches for 69 yards on a touchdown. Brett Donaldson 5 for 66 and a touchdown. And unfortunately, this was a game where Whitesboro is ahead 35 to I guess what is that? 35 to 27 with 9 minutes to go after they score, and then Brock comes up with a couple of touchdowns in the final 3.5 minutes. And again, Whitesboro, after that second one happens for them to fall behind, they've got a chance to go down and win it, and literally come up inches short. So things in this district are shaping up like we thought they would. This game was going to be a heavyweight one, and so now this week you have Brock is going to be involved in another big game, like we've been saying. When you look at the week by week, Brock is going to play Paradise, so the winner of that game is going to have sole possession of first place. I think everybody assumes it's going to be Brock. So you'll have Brock at 4-0, and you will have Paradise at 4-1. And then, of course, what happens next week when Whitesboro comes off the bye? They will be hosting Paradise next Friday, and obviously the winner of that will be in a tie. Will have second place by themselves. The loser will be in third place by themselves, and I think that's probably how the standings are going to finish. The Brock Paradise winner is going to be the number 1 seed. The Whitesboro Paradise winner is going to be the 2 seed, and the loser was going to be the 3 seed because everybody else in the district right now, Pilot Point's 1-2, Boyd is 1-3, Peaster and Ponder are both 0-3. So even the loser of Whitesboro Paradise is probably going to have at least a game or 2 lead on. Right now it would be Pilot Point, based on how things are going, and have the tiebreaker over them. So it's coming into picture. Unfortunately, I knew it would be a great game. Obviously the gap has gotten smaller. We talked about that last week, that between these two teams, they've seen each other enough. This was the third time in 368 days or whatever that crazy stat was, because they met in the playoffs, and even though it was at Brock, I thought Whitesboro had a really good chance, and they did. And Brock is now state ranked, and so literally, if you're Whitesboro, hey, we're a top 15, and not that they didn't think this anyway before, but you're right there amongst the best You've probably been thinking that all year because of how far you went last year. But they went toe-to-toe at their place. Maybe it's a different story if they're playing at Whitesboro. But the best thing for you to do right now is gear up for Paradise. You got 2 weeks to get ready for them, to put this behind you. Win a game that so that you can at least have the second seed. And then if things break the right way, we'll have Brock Whitesboro Part 4 in the region final again. So if you're gonna win the game, if you're gonna beat them, you might as well have it be for a spot in the state semifinals and have it be the best season in school history. So if we're gonna play, pick the future, would you rather beat them now or would you rather beat them in the playoffs? Of course, you want to beat them in the playoffs. So will be interesting to see how things play out. Like I said, they've got 2 weeks to get over this. I don't know if it would be better. It's always the question of the bye and when it happens. And would you rather just turn around and play Paradise this week and get back in the swing of things after that loss, or would you rather take the 2 weeks and then prepare for what's going to be we knew going into the district if the Paradise game was going to be the second biggest game. It just so happened the first biggest game came right before you played them. So we'll see how Whitesboro responds. I think it's going to be very favorable, and we'll talk more about that next week when they get back into the swing of things while they enjoy their bye this week. Moving over to District 5-3A Division 1, you have the Pottsboro Cardinals. They are going on the road and playing Emory Reigns. Pottsboro is 6-1 and 3-0. They won 36-35 against Winsboro, and Emory Reigns is 1-6 and 0-3 in district play. They lost against Mount Vernon 77-27. Winsboro came to town. We talked about how big this game was going to be, and anybody in attendance, you got your money's worth. Winsboro goes up. They've got a 35-22 lead. Is that right? Yeah, 23 lead. Excuse me. They've got a 35-23 lead after 3 quarters. They've actually got a 35-17 lead late in the third quarter after they score to go up 35-17, and then they never score again. And Pottsboro scores late in the third quarter. They score twice in the fourth quarter, and they end up winning by a point in a crucial game. Not for playoffs, because I think we both knew that both these teams were going to make the playoffs. But in terms of this matchup, Pottsboro gets sole possession of first place. They have the inside track to the district title. It's going to come down to their game against Mount Vernon, most likely. And we're either going to have a 3-way tie for first place, or Pottsboro's on their way to getting the district championship outright. But they went toe-to-toe with a team that we said last week was ranked. I think they were number 7 in the state last week. And even though they fell behind, that's a great sign to show them come flying back and do what they did. And so here you are, if you're Pottsboro, just doing what they do. Major McBride with another big game, 23 carries, 171 yards, and 3 touchdown runs. Halen Flanagan, throws for 241 yards, has a touchdown pass, also runs for a touchdown. Reed Thompson led the way in receiving. He had 6 catches for 111 yards and a touchdown. McBride also added 5 catches for 54 yards. So, he, again, over 220 yards from scrimmage. And so Pottsboro just keeps doing what they're doing. Again, very balanced. 241 yards passing, like we mentioned, 186 total yards rushing. And they found a way to slow down a Winsboro team that, has a really good offense themselves. It had all the confidence in the world after beating Mount Vernon the week before. And so now here you are. I don't want to call it a trap game. or a letdown game. Because I don't think it's a trap game. It'd be more of a letdown game. I don't think you have to worry about a letdown game. If you're Pottsboro, you've got Emory Reigns this week. If you win, you will clinch a playoff spot. So obviously that's something that you can hang your hat on to tell the kids, hey, let's just get that done. And then you play Commerce, and then you play Mount Vernon to finish. And if you want to make that really mean something at the end, like I said, you got to beat Emory Reigns, who is not doing well, is at the bottom of the standings. And then you have a Commerce team that's probably going to be in the mix for that last playoff spot. Right now, technically they hold that. They are 2-1, but they have played the bottom teams. They haven't played the top teams yet. And Minneola's in that mix as well. But Reigns is 0-3, bottom is 0-4. But you gotta win. You gotta go on the road, and you had an emotional game last week and all that. But you've got to bounce back this week and not let that carry over. I don't think that's gonna happen. And like I said, we're looking to see teams clinch playoff spots in this district. I haven't done all the math, but I'm assuming just looking at the schedule for games this week. If Winsboro wins, they're going to clinch a playoff spot. And I think there's a decent chance if Mount Vernon wins, they clinch a playoff spot as well. And so things are, like I said, we know who the top three teams in this district were. Pottsboro went a long way towards deciding, hey, we want to put our hat in the ring to be the best team. They did that. The first step they did that was against Winsboro. The next step is going to be against Mount Vernon, but you got these two games in between that you have to win to make sure that happens. So we'll see what happens when Pottsboro goes to Emory Reigns. I will point out they've been in this district together before. Last year Pottsboro won 45-0. So, and Pottsboro's won all three of the meetings between against these two. So we'll see what happens in that matchup in that 5-3A Division 1. All right, we go down to Division 2, and in District 6-3A Division 2, we have the SNS Rams hosting Holiday. SNS comes in at 1-6 and 0-2 after they lost 32-14 against Valley View, and Holiday comes in at 7-0 and 2-0. They are, I believe, ranked fourth. They're either third or fourth this week in the 3A Division 2 rankings. They've only given up 75 points in 7 games, so basically 10 points a game. And SNS, we talked about last week, they had a chance to try to get a win to kind of control their destiny a little bit to get a playoff spot. Both Holiday and Callisburg are 2-0. City View and Valley View are 1-1. And then SNS and Henrietta are both 0-2. So if you're looking at SNS's path, no matter what happens this week, which is not looking promising, you still have to beat City View and you still have to beat Henrietta. If you do those two things, next week and the week after, you will make the playoffs, assuming something crazy doesn't happen with City View, because you'd have the tiebreaker over them, and you would have the tiebreaker over Henrietta. So there is a chance to go 2-3 and make the playoffs in this district. Obviously, it's looking like Holiday and Callisburg. Like I said, if Holiday wins this week, they will clinch a playoff spot. I think if Callisburg wins, they will do the same. And City View and Valley View play each other, and that's a huge game because obviously the winner of that has the inside track to get third place. So, SNS, I hate to sound like a broken record because we say this every week. They were a little bit better on defense this week. They actually led in this game or in the first half, getting those 14 points. Chase Sloan had both of the touchdowns. He had 21 carries for 110 yards and the 2 touchdowns. They're up 14-7 at halftime. They just weren't able to keep that going in the second half. Valley View made some big plays to open the score. They've got a dynamic dual threat quarterback, Tyson Price, and he had 3 touchdown passes and 2 touchdown runs, and that's all the touchdowns that Valley View needed. So again, we thought there was a chance there in this game. Halfway through, it was looking good. But again, if you're the Rams, you still have a path. It's still there even if you lose this game. So you've got 2 games at the end that are probably are going to count to try to get you in the playoffs. And that's all you can ask for as you try to get some positive stuff going here in the last month of the season. We'll go down to District 8-3A Division 2, and the biggest game of the week, I think, at least for our area teams, when you're looking at the matchups, there's one other one that I think rivals it, but we have an all-local matchup with some very interesting subplots, and that is the Howe Bulldogs hosting the Bells Panthers. Both teams 5-2 on the season, 1-1 in district play. Howe lost last week against Gunner 54-21, while Bells, who lost to Gunner in the district opener, they bounced back in a huge way, 82-32 against Blue Ridge. So to run down these standings very quick after 2 games, you have Gunner alone in first place at 2-0. Howe, Bells, Blue Ridge, and Leonard are all 1-1, and Lone Oak is 0-2. And this is a huge week, not just because it is Bells Howe, but it is also Blue Ridge Leonard. Gunner is going to play Lone Oak. We'll talk about that game here in a minute. I think we all know how that's going to go. And so the other 2 matchups in this district, huge in terms of playoff implications, seeding implications. This is the swing week going into the final 2 games to see where people stand, because we're going to get in this little round robin where, just to look at next week, for instance, as I pull up the week-by-week schedule, Blue Ridge is going to play Howe next week. So there's a chance that they could both be tied in the standings. One could be in front of the other, and there's just so many outcomes. And Bells is going to finish with Leonard. And so there's going to be a lot of jockeying the last 2 weeks, but it starts this week to see who has a chance to hold that spot. Who's got a chance to get second place by themselves. Obviously, if you get 4th, you're looking at playing Gunner in a rematch potentially. If you get that far, you don't want that. And you've got 2 teams in Bells and Howe who I think both think they have a very good claim to the second spot, and the winner of this matchup in Bulldog Stadium is going to be in the running. If you're Howe, I think you feel relatively good about the fact that I know the final score says 54-21, but it was 7-7 after the first quarter. You led 14-7 in the second quarter. You were only down 28-14 at halftime. And then Gunner does what they normally do against a lot of people. They pulled away in the second half. But you showed you could hang with them. And again, this is all part of, we talked about how dropping down and getting experience and being better and doing these things. And how much of that was them dropping down. But you look at a game like this and you're playing with a team that many consider the best team in 3A Division 2, and you hung with them for whatever, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it may be. And if you can do that, you can beat a lot of teams. And in this game, just looking at what Howe was able to do, they ran for 150-something yards. They threw for 160-something yards. Only had 1 turnover. So they showed they could hang with them. Cooper Jones, 5 catches for 69 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also ran for a score. Austin Haley, 16 of 29 for just 129. Did have the 2 touchdowns to Cooper Jones. Also caught a 38-yard pass from Jones, so Jones did a little bit of everything. Did have the interception. But Antoine Rattler had 21 carries for 139 yards. So the run game was good there too as well. And so that's just a really good sign. Of course, you're playing a team that played Gunner even better in the district opener, 24-14. We talked about that game last week. We talked about how huge that was. What could Bells find a way to finally beat Gunner? And that was a game that was in doubt, till the fourth quarter. And then they bounced back in a huge way this week, 82-32. They were up 24-6 after the first quarter. They were up 54-18 at halftime, and they were able to cruise from there. Leading the way in this one, Brock Baker, 10 carries, 275 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Spencer Hines, 7 carries for 102 yards and 2 touchdowns. Grady Waldrop added 2 touchdowns. Bells did not have 1 yard passing, 578 yards, all on the ground, all on 33 carries, by the way. Not just all on the ground, but they had 33 carries for 578 yards. That I said this game was going to be interesting because Blue Ridge was able to put up 32 points. Obviously, 14 of that's in the fourth quarter with this game way out of reach. But Blue Ridge was playing well. I think they thought they had a chance to maybe surprise some people by beating Bells and get in the mix there for potentially second place, that sort of thing. But obviously this was not going to happen based on what Bells did. It's the third most points in school history, and so they're confident they've got their slot T rolling back. Whatever Gunner did to slow them down just a bit, they found it again, and I think again once that Gunner Bells game happened, I feel like the Panthers said, okay, we're the second best team in this district. We need to go out and prove it. They've been the only losses they've had in district we talked about the last 2 years have been to Gunner. They've beaten everybody else. Nobody has really challenged them for the second spot, and I think you're going to see potentially, they're thinking after losing last week, okay, well, if we can't get first seed, we're going to make stinking sure we're going to get second seed. And they go and do this against Blue Ridge. They're probably going to be looking to do a lot of this against Howe, and then they've got Lone Oak, who obviously they should probably be able to beat. We'll talk about Lone Oak's struggles here next, and then they end with Leonard, and by that point they may have already locked in the second seed. So everything's right there for Bells, but everything's right there for Howe too. They've already got a win over Leonard, so they'll have that matchup with Blue Ridge. I really look at this game and I say the winner of this game is the second best team in this district. Now, the loser's probably the third best team, and without looking at the bracket and seeing, second maybe, you may want second over third because of the potential matchups. And like I said, everybody wants to avoid fourth because you don't want to see Gunner on your side of the bracket. But this has a chance to be a really good game. I think, obviously, Bells with what they do, obviously being one-dimensional, but they're so good at it. Howe's shown they can do both. I don't know if that's the difference. Bells is able to force turnovers. They forced a ton this last week. They've done it. They've forced a ton early in the season. I'm really excited to see what the outcome of this game is. I'll be checking the scores for sure to see what things look like, because I think this is if it's not the biggest game, it's the second biggest game to a game we're going to talk about here in a minute. But I think obviously all eyes are going to be on this one for sure, just to see what happens when Bells travels to Howe in 8-3A Division II action. The other game in this district, Gunner's going to Lone Oak. Gunner is 6-0, 2-0 after they won, like we said, 54-21 against Howe. Lone Oak is 0-7 and 0-2. They lost last week 41-21 against Leonard. This game last year was 77-15. It probably wasn't that close. The last two games in this district, they've played. The Gunners outscored Lone Oak 140-21. Lone Oak has not won a district game since 2019. I think it's safe to say that streak is going to continue at least for one more week. And we talked about Gunner. They had the game against Bells. How are they going to react? Because that game is so close and it's physical and it's emotional because you're being tested again. And then you have a Howe team that wants to show they can play with you. And not to take anything away from Howe, but is that why that score was 14-7 Howe early on? Was it just take a while for Gunner to get back in the groove? I don't know. But when you put up 54 points and you pull away like you do, and you run for 324 yards and you throw in 142 yards passing, the end result's going to look pretty good. And that's what Gunner did again. Ethan Sloan, 13 carries, 129 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Ivy Hellman, 14 carries, 75 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Walker Overman, 12 carries, 61 yards, and a touchdown. He also was 10 of 13 passing for 84 yards. Luke Dodd was 2 of 3 passing 58 yards and had a touchdown pass to Mitchell Gage. Just looking at if I think that's all. Oh, Jason Martin had another kickoff return for a touchdown, 70 yards in this one. That's his third kickoff return for a touchdown. Gunner special teams again. I think that's their fourth or fifth total when you throw in punt returns. And if you throw in just defense and special teams, they're averaging basically one of those a game so far this season. So again, all around, all three phases, it's what you expect from Gunner. And this one is it should be over early. The last ones against Lone Oak have been over early. Lone Oak is struggling. I think they've only scored. I was looking at it earlier. They've actually scored 118 points in they had a game against somebody where they actually scored some points. They scored 32 points against Price Carlisle to kind of right before district started to bump that total up. But they scored 6 points against Blue Ridge. They scored 21 points against Leonard. They've struggled to score this season, and obviously I think we may be on potentially a shutout watch depending on how the game goes past halftime in this one. So again, if you're Gunner, you're 3-0. You're gonna be in solid position. For the top seed. Obviously, the winner of Blue Ridge Leonard is the only team that will have a chance to take you out of that spot because you already have the tiebreaker over Howe and Bells. You've already beaten them. So the Blue Ridge Leonard winner stays in the running at least until they match up with Gunner. So that'll be if you care about that score, it's only to see maybe how bad that score might end up being against Lone Oak. So unfortunately, that's been the only team so far in the district that has not been competitive against each other or in their games. All the other games have been relatively competitive, if not for a half, for the whole game. So that's Gunner at Lone Oak. Maybe the less we say, the better. And we move down to 6-2A Division I, where we have 3 games on the docket. We don't have any all-local matchup this week after we've had one the first couple weeks of this district's play. We'll start with the team that's in first place by themselves. That's the Tioga Bulldogs. They are at Nakona, and they are 5-2, 2-0. Nakona is 6-1 and 1-1. Tioga won last week 35-14 against Alvord. Nakona lost 23-21 against Trenton. That was surprising, although maybe not that surprising, because we talked about last week. Whitewright played Nakona really tough. They were 5-0. We didn't know how good they were going to be, and that game was 25-18. It was a 7-point game. Whitewright hung tough, was unable to get a touchdown late to force overtime, and Trenton ends up getting the job done. So you have Tioga at 2-0, you have Tom Bean at 0-2, and then you have Whitewright, Nakona, Alvord, and Trenton all sitting at 1-1. So again, this is another interesting week to see how things play out because as we'll talk about, one of the games will have 2 of those teams that are 1-1, so that's where the jockeying begins. If you're Tioga, you can clinch a playoff spot with a win. You will clinch your first winning season since moving into 11-man in 2018, and you will remain in the driver's seat to win the district championship. They beat Alvord, who was a team that they did not beat last year. And again, this was a game that 35-14 you think is I would say relatively close. But it was 28-14 at halftime, and Alvord didn't score in the second half, and that's some really good defense by the Bulldogs. They get 16 carries and 181 yards and 2 touchdowns from Chase Evans. Jonah Grubbs, 16 carries, 67 yards, 2 touchdowns as well. Austin Norwood runs for a score. Tioga runs 36 times for 276 yards. Throws for 104 with Norwood, 8 of 12, very efficient. Greeley McAden led the receivers, 2 catches for 41 yards. You had 4 guys with 2 catches apiece, so that got spread around a little bit. And here you are in first place. And if you want to stay there by yourself, you're going to face a Nakona team that again, I don't know how good they are. I feel like just the way things have gone so far in this district. I mean, they could be 2-0, they could be 0-2, they are 1-1. And so and this game is at Nakona, so there's that aspect to it as well. But obviously Tioga's in the driver's seat. Obviously they're in the driver's seat until somebody loses. And it's going to be interesting to see all the games this week, because this is where we'll really see where things set up for the final 2 weeks. And of course, if you are Tioga and you are able to get this win, you are finishing with Trenton and Whitewright. Or I guess technically Whitewright and Trenton. I think next week is Whitewright Tioga. No, Trenton Tioga is next week. So there's going to be some people that are going to be right behind you. But you've got a chance to potentially finish out. You've got a chance at an undefeated run if you take care of business, I think, against Nakona and the rest of the teams. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. They'll have clinched their playoff spot if they win this week. You get that out of the way. That's always good. And so we'll see what happens when Tioga makes that trip out to Nakona. And the swing game in this district this week, the Whitewright Tigers hosting the Trenton Tigers. It's all Tigers all the time. Trenton is 4-3 and 1-1. We mentioned they beat Nakona last week by 2. And Whitewright is 3-4 and 1-1. They won last week 40-6 against Tom Bean. We talk about guys getting healthy for Whitewright, guys getting back on the field, so they can kind of get back to what they looked like the first couple weeks of the season when they were looking good. And this was a game where they were up 33-0 at halftime. Kenneth York, 14 carries, 117 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Jackson Evans, 7 carries, 91 yards, and a touchdown. Tyler Ball at quarterback, 7 carries, 33 yards, and a touchdown. He was also 5 of 9 passing for 63 yards. Maverick Sartain, 2 catches, 48 yards. The only thing, and to throw in defensively, they held Tom Bean to under 130 yards, and Casey Sanders returned a fumble, 57 yards for a touchdown. And the only thing that kept them from getting a shutout was a kickoff return after the last touchdown in the third quarter, so late in the third quarter. So a very nice bounce back win for Whitewright. Like we said, they played Nakona close. We didn't know how that was going to go. They had potentially a chance to win that game, and they didn't. But in this district, you don't have time to rest on your laurels or cry in your spilled milk, because every game is going to count. And like we've said before, Tom Bean is a team that's playing for pride because they're not eligible to go to the playoffs. So you have 5 teams fighting for 4 spots, and one you got to beat Tom Bean, because if you don't, there's no tiebreaker there. But if somebody loses to Tom Bean and somebody else doesn't, that could end up being the difference. And like we said, right now there's a 4-way tie for second place. And so going into this game against Trenton, Trenton sitting here at 4-3. They lost to Alvord. So this is where it starts to get obviously very interesting. So Alvord beat Trenton 63-28, and then they turn around and beat Nakona by 2. So you have all these things happening in all these other games. I want to feel like this is a close game. They both played Nakona tough for common opponents. One beat by 2, one lost by 7. So I mean, is this a 10-point game one way or another? Is Trenton the favorite? I don't know. So it's going to be, but obviously it's a swing game, because somebody's going to go to 2-1, somebody's going to go to 1-2, and neither team has played Tioga yet. So if you want to have a chance to share a district championship, you've got to win this game to stay in that mix, to keep pace with what Tioga's doing. So so I'm really interested to see this one, because it's gonna have an effect on how things shake out the last 2 weeks in this district. And we talked about Tom Bean, because they did lose to Whitewright last week 40-6. They are now 2-5, 0-2 as they travel to Alvord, who is 4-3 and 1-1 after they lost to Tioga. Again, we've talked about last week and going into this district. Can Tom Bean be a spoiler? Can they find a way to make some things happen? They were able to score 30 points against Tioga. We talked about how hey, that's good. That they putting up some points, getting some yards, making things happen. Now you have an Alvord team that's coming off a loss to Tioga. They didn't score more points. I don't know. This is such an interesting district because a lot of you try to compare things and you really can't. But again, if you're Alvord, you're at home. You have to win to keep pace with the people that you're tied with at 1-1. And again, you've got Tom Bean with 3 games left to kind of play spoiler. Can we pick somebody off? Can we ruin somebody's season? And they'll try to do that in this game. Like I said, against White Wright, they had only 41 yards rushing on 22 carries, 78 yards passing. Not a whole lot of offense to speak of. Jason Soroy had the 78-yard kickoff return for a touchdown to avoid the shutout. And that was pretty much all that Tom Bean was able to do in that one. But they'll try to play spoiler again in this 6-2A Division I matchup at Alvord on Friday night. And the last game, if Bell's Howe is not the biggest game, the only reason it's not is because this last game in District 8-2A Division II, where Collinsville is hosting Santo. You have Santo is 7-0, 3-0 after they won 28-0 against Lindsay, and Collinsville is 6-1, 3-0 after they won 76-6 against Era. And this is, if Bell's Howe is not the game of the week, this is the game of the week because this is for sole possession of first place. Santo is giving up next to no points. They've given up 37 points. That's 5.3 points per game through 7 games. They're ranked in the top 10 in 2A Division 2. And you have a Collinsville team whose only loss is to Cooper. Cooper is still undefeated. They have a big matchup with Honey Grove this week, but they're 7-0. So obviously that's a really good loss to have come against a team that's undefeated. And you look at this matchup, the winner's going to clinch a playoff spot. The winner's going to have the inside track for the top seed. They're both 3-0. Celeste is 2-1. Munster is 2-1. Chico and Lindsay are 1-3. Ayers 0-4. Again, I think in this district with 3 weeks to go, we know who the playoff teams are going to be. Collinsville, Santos, Celeste, and Munster. There's a chance that just in the grand scheme of this district, you look at the other games this week. After Santo Collinsville, Era is playing Celeste and Munster is playing Lindsay. So if you assume that Celeste and Munster both win, that just widens the gap even more. And so I think we know who the top 4 teams are. Collinsville's already, they're already better than last year. When they only won 4 games. They're coming off this huge win over Era. And it wasn't anything super special. They're up 57-0 at halftime. They're able to cruise from there. Logan Jenkins was 15 of 23 passing for 230 yards and 7 touchdowns. Rylan Newman 8 carries for 116 yards and a touchdown. The receivers, Landon Carpenter 4 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown. Carter Scott 2 catches, 47 yards and a touchdown. He also returned an interception for a score. Colin Barnes 3 catches for 40 yards and a touchdown. Nathan Bocanegra 4 for 39 and a touchdown. Newman also caught a touchdown pass. His lone catch was 38 yards and a touchdown. Reed Patterson brought back an interception for a touchdown. So there wasn't any super crazy numbers in this game, despite the fact that it was 76-6. Era had 7 turnovers, 6 interceptions. Collinsville barely had 400 yards of offense in a game where you score 76 points. You expect some super crazy numbers, and they didn't have that. But again, it's gonna be this is a huge game. Is Santo for real? They probably should have lost to Munster. to open district play. We talked about that at the time. Or excuse me, the second game of district play. They were up 17-0 on Santo at half. Santo won that game 21-17. I was surprised last week that they only beat Lindsay 28-0. If you want to play the comparative score game, Collinsville beat Lindsay 26-0. Does that mean anything in terms of they both shut them out and they both only scored in the mid-20s? Obviously, we've talked about with Collinsville. They play Munster next week, so you have these two big games in a row. So we can't compare Collinsville Munster score just yet. But like I said, Santo has not allowed. I don't think they've allowed more than a touchdown in a game. And just looking at, they shut out Electra. Let's see, they shut out Electra. 7 points against Goldthwaite. Shut out Hamilton, so that's 2 shutouts. Rio Vista got 7. I guess Munster's the only one to score more than 7 points. Because then they shut out Era, and they've shut out, so they got 4 shutouts in 7 games. And the most points they've allowed in a game was to Munster, 17. And they haven't allowed more than 7 points in a game outside of that Munster game. So we'll see what Collinsville's got as they try to not only put up the best numbers against Santo, but also come away with the win. And like I said, if they do that, clinch a playoff spot, be on the inside track for the district championship going into that huge showdown the following week against Munster. And just to point out the 76 points, the most scored by the Pirates since 1973, when they had 82 points in a game against Blue Ridge. So that's a huge, like I said, the 2 biggest games, no matter how you want to order them, 1-2, Santo Collinsville. It's at Collinsville. And it's a 7:00 start. So if you're thinking, hey, I want to get out here and see this big game, be sure to get there for 7:00. So that's all the games this week. It's getting real exciting. It's getting real fun. Everybody's scoreboard watching this time of year to see what's happening in the other games in your district. What affects your chances? What do you have to do to clinch a playoff spot, clinch a seed, whatever? We're starting to get to that point. Week 9. It's almost the end of October. It's crazy how fast it flies, and it's crazy how things are starting to shape up for a lot of our teams. Things are looking really good for us to get a lot of playoff teams. So again, enjoy the games this week. It looks like it's definitely going to be the last good week of warm weather, even though we're hitting the cold patch early this week. So enjoy the games. Stay safe while you're going on some of these trips to go see some of these teams. Thanks for tuning in, and we will talk to you next week on the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast.